report number 4 that you just mentioned?
Yes, that's correct, and I'm still working on that report because that will provide details of the number of jobs that will be created, exactly what those jobs are in terms of airport-based jobs, the knock-on to the economy, and also the key training elements that will be involved too.
Just explain for the inspector then, please, the basic structure of each of the 3 reports that he's got in your appendices.
So the first report looks in a more top-down way, a macro-level way, at the demand for capacity, particularly for freight in the southeast, and places Manston in the context of other potential airports that could be developed, and concludes that Manston is the only viable option for development in the southeast that can provide capacity in the short, medium and long term. The second report details the qualitative research that I undertook with a range of interviewees, and that's detailed in my volume 2. And then the third volume presents the forecasts and necessary infrastructure requirement that runs from those forecasts.
We'll come to those in a little more detail in a moment, but for now we'll just turn back to your summary proof of evidence, please, tab 21. And when you get there, Dr. Dixon, please would you read sections 3 and 4?
So this is talking about demand in the southeast of the UK. As set out in my report, the aviation sector is of vital importance to the UK, contributing £52 billion, that's 3.4% to UK GDP, and supporting 961,000 jobs. That's based on Oxford Economics figures. The importance of air travel is forecast to continue to grow, with 50% more flights in 2035 than there were in 2012, from around 9 million per year to 14.4 million, and they're Eurocontrol figures. Airport capacity is a problem not just in the UK, but also in Europe, where capacity is forecast to increase by 17% to 2035, but leave a shortfall of around 9 runways worth of capacity. In the UK, non-EU trade accounts for just under half of all UK trade, and 35% of these goods are air freighted. Both figures could increase following the UK's withdrawal from the EU. It is clear that the aviation market prefers the southeast of England, with forecasts showing that by 2050 the value of air cargo lost to London due to capacity constraints would equate to £106 billion per annum, with net national losses of around £3.9 billion per annum. The London airports facilitate 76% of the UK's air freight, and all London airports will be at capacity by 2030. That's the Airports Commission's work on that. The number of dedicated freighter movements that will be unmet by London airports is forecast to be 79,712, with no additional runways, amounting to some 2.1 million tonnes of freight. This 2.1 million tonnes of freight, some 100,000 truckloads, would be diverted elsewhere, mainly to Northern European airports, putting huge pressure on the road network and channel crossings. Manston is located in the southeast, where aviation industry demand is highest and most constrained. As set out in my report, the airport has an ideal airspace location, benefits from easy surface access to London and the rest of the UK, is located close to mainland Europe, has long runway and can, with River Oaks' proposed investment, provide rapid handling and turnaround times for air freight. The airport would provide almost immediate relief to the pressing situation that is causing £2 billion in potential trade to be lost to the southeast each year we remain without additional runway capacity. The DCO process requires River Oak to provide evidence that shows Manston can relieve pressure on the UK network by handling at least 10,000 freighter movements per year. Transport for London specifically mentions Manston, saying the airport can take 14,000 movements per annum and relieve other southeast airports. Therefore, whilst in the short to medium term, Manston will be vital as an operational airport, even in the longer term to 2050, and with a third runway at Heathrow in place, Manston provides the only airport infrastructure in the southeast that can provide the capacity needed to support the 54,000 overspill predicted within the necessary time scale.
Thank you. Now we turn to demand assessment and to report volume 2. So tab 19. And within tab 19 we've got, as I say, we've got volume 2 and section 3 of that report. In section 3 of that report you conduct a review of air freight forecasting literature. Quite a long section from page 6 through to page 21.
That's correct, yes. And that took a considerable amount of time at the beginning of the study, but I felt it was necessary to review what else had been done in order that I pick the most appropriate methodology to use in the Manston case.
In short, your conclusion, I think, was that there was no existing forecast which would tell you about whether or not, which was capable of being relied upon, to give a realistic picture of whether or not Manston Airport could viably be operated. Is that right?
That's correct. It needed to be a qualitative piece of research rather than the a quantitative study on its own, whilst the quantitative study, as Mr. Kane has described, can give a general picture of the demand requirement for Manston to be able to use those figures required a qualitative study.
Okay, so you have then on page 22, please, the research methodology employed. Tell the inspector, if you would please, what figure 7 shows.
So figure 7 outlines the steps that I took in order to reach the conclusions that I did. So I started off with a review of the literature and to identify a range of demand methods, and I analysed those methods and selected the most appropriate one for Manston, which was a qualitative approach in line with what the literature said. I then conducted in-depth interviews with industry specialists, analysed the findings, and then checked against a number of scenarios that had been identified during the course of the research.
And if you turn then to your page 23, we have at 4.2.2 a list of potential interviewees. So just to tell the inspector how you identified those.
So the list of organisations included Kent Infrastructure, Kent Transport Infrastructure representatives, government and public sector, industry associations, freight forwarders and integrators, local import and export businesses and cargo airlines.
In order to understand the objectives, set out, please, for the inspector, your 4.2.3. What were you trying to understand through this process?
So the objective of the primary data collection phase was to understand the processes and issues associated with air freight generally, to investigate the likely trends in air freight in the future, to identify what might motivate airlines and other organisations to use Manston Airport, and also to provide information to use in preparing the forecast for Manston Airport.
Dr. Dixon, I don't invite you to read, but just so that you can note, there's a full list of interviewees over the page on page 25. Thank you. We've then got a succinct summary then. In your summary proof of evidence, we'll go back to that. Tab 21, please, section 5. Read, if you would, please, paragraph 5.1 through to the end of 5.5.
Volumes 2 and 3 of my report set out the demand for Manston as an operational airport. This includes freight and passenger demand and other revenue-generating activities. My research identified issues that potential users of Manston have raised, which stem from existing airports' increasing focus on passenger services. These are the lack of available slots for freight at southeast airports, the bumping of freight from passenger aircraft, security issues, particularly with outsized cargo, the speed of turnaround and bottlenecks for air freight.
Just explain, please, what bumping of freight from passenger aircraft is.
Bumping of freight was a particular issue that was raised by a number of the interviewees, and that means that freight that was scheduled to be carried in the belly of a passenger aircraft gets bumped off, and the interviews that I conducted, this was happening 3, maybe 4 times, so that people who are waiting for time-sensitive equipment, particularly and strangely for aircraft that have gone tech somewhere around the world, have given up waiting after they were bumped up from the 3rd or 4th time, and the equipment was flown in or out of one of the northern European airports.
Thank you. Back then, please, to your 5.2.
Interviewees have provided insight into the potential markets for Manston. These are perishables, including fruit, vegetables, flowers, fish and shellfish, outsized freight, express freight, Formula 1 and luxury cars, live animals, particularly for breeding or racing, time-sensitive items such as aircraft and the oil and gas industry, humanitarian and military flights. The research has also identified opportunities for aircraft recycling, on-site maintenance, repair and overall facility, a fixed base operator, for example for business private jet operation, and flying school. There is the potential to attract an integrator to Manston, which would further increase the profitability of the airport. In terms of passenger services, this research has identified opportunities including providing a base for a number of low-cost carrier aircraft, charter and scheduled flights, and a tie-up with Dover Harbour Board to receive passengers destined for cruise ships. The Paramount Theme Park and Ebbsfleet Garden City developments are expected to increase demand. The Lower Thames Crossing will improve accessibility by road to Manston, and the Thames Estuary 2050 regeneration project benefit from the presence of an air freight focused airport and will in turn stimulate demand.
5.5, please.
My report shows a summary of the freight and passenger forecasts for the first 20 years of operation, from 2020 to 2040, following the reopening of Manston. These forecasts are considerably more conservative than those derived from a macro-level top-down method.
Now, I just want to link for the inspector the assessment work and the forecasting. And in order to do that, we're going to turn to the third report, so tab 20. And within that, to page 6, please. If you flick back to page 5, you'll get the heading. Short and medium term freight forecasting model. And then at 6, you'll see at 2.2.4 and 2.2.5 some familiar conclusions. So we've just looked at those in the summary. And the translation from assessment work, demand assessment work to forecasting work then comes Dr. Dixon in, so far as an explanation is concerned, in 2.2.6 and 2.2.7. Please take the inspector through that work.
As such, and also based on market knowledge and confidential discussions with airlines, airports and organisations involved in the freight forward and integrator markets, a short and medium-term forecast was produced. The freight movements shown in the forecast relate, where possible, to particular carriers identified through the qualitative research. The identity of these carriers is necessarily confidential for commercial reasons. The forecast includes 10 aircraft of various types that will be recycled at Manston. These aircraft will arrive without cargo. Outputs for the freight forecast show the number of movements and the tonnage by year for imports and exports. Tonnage figures have been calculated from the maximum payload for each aircraft type and multiplying by 65% to give an indication of tonnage for the main route, either import or export. 65% is an average figure that intends to cover both full loads and out of gauge. That's cargo that exceeds the internal dimensions of a container by length, width or height. Rush parts such as critical parts for oil rigs, aircraft, etc.
As you can see, it provides some detailed information about backloads and specific aircraft mix and so on. If you turn back to the beginning of the executive summary, sticking with report number 3, executive summary just on page 1, you should find there table 1 summary 20-year freight and passenger forecast. Do you have that?
I do indeed.
Great.
Yeah.
Dr. Dixon, then could you just explain to the inspector what summary information he finds within this table?
So in table 1 I've summarised all the forecast figures so that they can be seen all together. The first column shows the year of operation, and the first year is a non-operational year to give time to do the necessary additions to the development of the airport. It's considerable development as has been discussed. The second column shows the freight movements as an annual figure. And then the following column shows the passenger movements. And then there's a total, so that's a total number of aircraft movements in that fourth column. Then the 3 columns after that show the tonnage, and that's split by inbound and outbound. That is the only way to work out, be specific about what that would be and how much the tonnage is likely to be, is to show an inbound and outbound figures, and then to total that up to give an annual tonnage. And the final column shows the number of passengers that could be handled by Manston in years 1 to 20.
Not set out obviously in this table, but what growth assumptions have you made, please?
So from year 1 to 10 is based on the qualitative research. From year 11 to 20 I applied 4% for both passengers and freight.
And how does that compare to Mr. Kane's work?
It's broadly comparable with Mr. Kane. He was talking about 3.7%. I took what I felt to be quite a conservative figure when I looked at the forecasts that are broken down by region pairs, so between Europe and other parts of the world. The intra-Europe is quite a low figure, and because my forecast doesn't contain any inter-Europe figures, whereas, for example, Europe, Middle East is something like 11%. So I felt that 4% was a more than reasonable, rather conservative figure to apply.
We're going to turn now to the practical implications of the work. So within report number 3, turn please to page 17. And at page 17 you should have a heading there, 5 infrastructure requirements. So, practical implications please of your work.
So the table 6 shows the number of freight stands that will be required based on the forecast that I've produced, and also the warehousing space required and the truck parking. It was decided by the master planners that it would be best to undertake sufficient redevelopment of the airport before reopening, in order not to disrupt operations once the airport is open, and also to give, as Mr. Kane was talking about, that level of confidence to freight operators that they know that this is a serious long-term investment, and that the airport will be there hopefully for at least another 100 years. The difference between what I think most the other operators that have had Manston is that they haven't put that infrastructure in, and I think River Oak doing this before they even open shows the level of commitment to the airport in the long term.
We turn back then please to your summary proof of evidence. to page 5. And we left off here at 5.5, so if you could read from 5.6 through to the end, please.
Manston is forecast to attract around 10,000 freight movements and 174,000 tonnes of freight by year 5 of operation, 11,600 movements and 212,000 tonnes by year 10, and 17,000 movements and 340,000 tonnes by year 20. Passenger numbers are forecast to commence at around 660,000 per year, rising to 1.4 million by year 20 of operation. Infrastructure requirements are scheduled to match forecast demand, and construction will take place in 4 phases. These will be prior to operations commencing in year 2 for freight and year 3 for passengers, in year 4, year 10 and year 15. Operations will commence with 8 stands for freight, where previously operated with only 1, and 3 for passenger aircraft. The number of freight stands will rise to 14 in year 4, 16 in year 10 and 19 in year 15. Passenger aircraft stands will increase from 3 to 4 in year 15. Warehousing and fuel storage will be provided. With the high level of investment proposed by River Oak, its geographic location, long runway and favourable airspace position, Manston is capable of handling considerable air freight movements, at least to the volumes required by the DCO process. In addition, Manston can attract passenger traffic, and as at paragraph 5.3, is also capable of attracting other revenue activities. Manston Airport is a very valuable local, regional and national asset, capable of providing infrastructure badly needed by the UK and playing a role in helping Britain's connectedness and trade with the rest of the world.
Just lastly, this, Dr. Dixon, I think the inspector will have gathered you're a natural diplomat, but if we can just overcome that for a moment, could you comment, please, in light of all of the work that you've done and the thinking that you've done about the prospect of Manston reopening and what that would comprise, what sort of weight would you be telling the inspector should be afforded to the Avia Solutions work by comparison?
I think, as Mr. Kane has pointed out, the Avia Solutions report is flawed in quite a number of areas. I would therefore not want to put any weight on that report.
You say not any weight?
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Dixon. So do you have any questions for Dr. Dixon?
I don't have any questions.